Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. I'm here today with Benjamin Red as usual. How are you, Ben?
I'm good, Nizar. How are you doing?
Not bad. The World Cup is happening.
Yeah, right? Like the entire city, the entire world, really. It is just like filled with Mondial fever, and Beirut and Lebanon is no exception.
I know. Now the politics is Germany versus Brazil versus... It's completely different, right? People are making jokes about this. People are doing analysis. If you have like Lebanese friends on Facebook, everyone has their own theory and analysis about what's happening.
Yeah, it's almost as if these people find the World Cup as interesting as I find Lebanese politics interesting.
Yeah, so much affiliation, so much passion. Crazy times.
And we have our own little like spin on that politically, though, right? With what happened with Ziad Shabib this past
governor.
week. Yeah, so he announced something crazy like, oh, you can't fly flags for other countries in Lebanon. And he goes back and he cites this law from like 1945.
Yeah.
Saying, like, you can't do... And this is nuts, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody who's been in Lebanon during a World Cup knows there's just like, there's flags for Brazil and Argentina and France and Germany all over the place, you know? But he decided that it was worth his time to come out with this, like, memorandum and say, by the way, guys, this is illegal. You're not allowed to do this.
Yeah, there was a lot of backlash, though. People were making fun of it. People were criticizing it seriously. Because I think like showing affiliation to or support to a national team in the World Cup is like the most explicit display of affiliation and support in Lebanon. Like people who are not so politically involved or whatever find the World Cup as the right time to say, hey, I support this, I'm part of this team, etc.
Right. But it doesn't mean that like it doesn't mean that like, oh, even if somebody's like flying the flag of Germany, it doesn't mean that like, oh, I love Angela Merkel and her policy. Like it's totally divorced from politics.
Yeah. But he cited 3 reasons, right, to
Ziad Shabib,
yeah, Beirut's governor, the cases in which people cannot be waving the flags. One of them is,
so like this was a serious thing. First off, like, because
no joke.
I thought it was a joke for like a week, right?
No, It's just a memo that he sent to the police forces, and he announced it on the media 1 day earlier to create like a little fuss around it.
Right. So what were the 3 reasons? Not
to provoke people, or actually, you are not allowed to wave flags if you're provoking others and creating troubles, which is not so uncommon in Lebanon.
Right.
To disturb the city's, not in the intention of, but if you are distorting or disturbing the city's look, in terms of like putting a flag over a facade of a whole building, or maybe across the street, which is very common as well, or when they're used outside of the context of football, which is this time with this World Cup, it's very interesting that we have the very political countries competing. We have Russia, we have Saudi Arabia, we have Iran, and these countries are very relevant in Lebanese politics, so we might also expect some...
So like the nice way to think of this is that Ziad Shabib was worried that maybe a bunch of, say, certain people would be running around flying the flag of Iran, and other people would be running around flying the flag of Saudi, and that might cause problems.
True.
So that's the nice theory that some people have put out there.
And the other theory is that he supports Italy or the Netherlands. And it's just an act of revenge against everyone else, which is also possible.
Okay, this wasn't this week, but this was last week. We just want to note that we had 17 election appeals that were filed. That goes before the Constitutional Council. So whenever they get good and ready, they will announce what's going to go on with that. They can do a few different things. They can just dismiss the appeal. They can like void the election and order new elections. And if that happens, if there's like 2 or fewer seats in a constituency where this happens, it goes back to the first past the post system. So there's a different calculus involved than the proportional law that we had this time around. Okay, so they can dismiss things, they can order a new election, or they can just say, oh no, you really did win. You're appealing, and we're just going to like make you an MP now, and your opponent, they're no longer an MP.
Yeah, it has happened before. It can happen.
Right, so these are the 3 different possibilities that happen. I mean, usually they just dismiss most of them, but we'll see what happens. Until that point, an MP who is being challenged, their seat that's being challenged, they're still an MP.
Yeah.
They can still vote, still have all of the powers of an MP. So we do have 128 MPs fully empowered at this time.
Yeah.
Speaking of new MPs, a new MP, Jamila Sayed, he went to the Special Tribunal for Lebanon about a week ago to give testimony. And he testified for 3 days and said some pretty interesting things, especially concerning Syria and his role. He used to be the head of general security, I should say. And he was sort of blamed for a while for actually Hariri's assassination. Or they said he had a hand in it. He was one of 4 generals they locked up, saying, okay, you knew about this, or you helped plot this. Ultimately, he was released because there wasn't the evidence to back that up. But yeah, so he, the newly minted MP, traveled.
Who won on Hezbollah's list in Al-Bakirmel, just to be very specific.
Right. Although he is not a member of Hezbollah's bloc or Amal's bloc.
But he got the largest amount of votes on that list, which is also interesting.
It's very
I think
interesting.
he got 31 or 33,000 votes, which is really big.
Yeah, so he had some very colorful testimony, right? And he had some interesting things to say, like who was responsible for Rafiq Hariri's assassination. Well, he said basically like the U.S. and Israel, essentially. He was very, I guess, apologetic towards the Syrians. He's sort of known to be close to Bashar al-Assad, to be close to...
Very close.
Yeah. Being the head of general security during that time, he definitely was.
So the interesting thing is that the usual argument is that Syria, among like the March 14 camp, is that Syria killed Rafiq Hariri because he was taking some stances against them. And then Jamil Sayed's argument is exact opposite. It's because Hariri was so loyal and supportive of Syria that Israel killed him to get the Syrians out of Lebanon. So it's a very interesting reasoning.
Right. It was he basically alleged like sort of a false flag type attack.
Yeah.
It said like, oh no, Hariri. There was this UN Security Council resolution, I think 1559, right, that had been approved like in 2004. That basically called, okay, well, now that Israel has withdrawn from the south, everybody, all the foreign powers should leave. That basically meaning Syria. And so he said Hariri was not for implementing this UN Security Council resolution. And basically that's why he paid the ultimate price. And so somehow Israel or the United States or somebody, backed by them, did this and put the blame on Syria and put the blame on like sort of the March 8th types, and therefore was able to push Syria out. A different take from what we typically hear.
Let's say interesting for now.
I think we should quickly talk about the naturalization decree. Like we spent a long time on this in our last podcast, but we've had a few developments since then. So the Interior Ministry actually published it. So that's great. One of my personal gripes, right, was that this had been done in secret, and we didn't even know the names, and we didn't know that the Salim Jursati, the FPM's justice minister, he came out and said, oh, it doesn't even need to be published, right? And so all of a sudden we were wondering, are we ever going to see this? Sami Jamail tried to get a copy of it and was shut down, all this stuff. So they published it. The Interior Ministry just came out, put it on their website. Here it is. Apparently there's more than 400 names. So there's more names than we thought. And so now the General Security is doing a check on all of these names, supposedly, but they're not finished. But interestingly enough, some of the people on this list, they're already filing their paperwork with the Interior Ministry to go ahead and get naturalized.
Wow.
Which is like, okay, you probably should wait for the investigation to finish. But on the other hand, it's like this decree is already signed, right? So it should be in force. So, like right now, politicians are trying to play both sides of it. It is a legal decree. It should be in force, but they're trying to say, oh, well, let's not implement it until General Security has finished its review of all of the names on the list. Yet it seems to...
Which is a very interesting process to happen after the decree is already signed. Right?
Right. And this is also why we see, people coming out like the Patriarch, Bashar al-Rai, coming out against it. And saying this needs to be annulled. This should not happen like this.
And you have like 3 political parties also going against it: PSP, the Lebanese Forces, and Kataib, right?
Right.
PSP is the one filing the Shura Council appeal.
Yeah.
And the Lebanese Forces are preparing their file as well.
I think it's great that the PSP figured out the right way to submit an appeal. It's not at the Constitutional Council; it is at the Shura Council for something like this. Good for them. The big story, though, this week was Gibran Bassil, the foreign minister and the head of the Free Patriotic Movement. He just came out huge broadside against UNHCR, and this started back, I think, on Thursday or Friday of last week. So not this past Friday, but the week before then. And he had come out the day before or something and said we're very unhappy with the way the UNHCR is operating in the country. Mm-hmm. We're unhappy that he was basically alleging that UNHCR was pressuring Syrians to stay in Lebanon when everything's fine in Syria. You can just go back, right?
Yep.
And he said, okay, well, we're going to do something. And then Friday he came out and instructed general security not to process any residency permits for UNHCR staff. So not any renewals, not any new residency permits for the staff of UNHCR in the country, which is pretty huge, a pretty huge escalation. Yeah.
I wonder how many people work for UNHCR in Lebanon, but I would say thousands, because they employ people directly and then they employ people through partner organizations, right? So you have all these little NGOs in different villages and towns created for the sake of using UNHCR money to provide assistance to refugees. So I wonder, without UNHCR staff being in Lebanon, how all this process will be happening. Apart from UNHCR having actually a lot of responsibility for registering refugees and doing some helping them with paperwork, apart from just direct assistance. So
yeah, and I mean, UNHCR and all the international community is not happy with this. Yeah. Basically, UNHCR says this is not what we're doing. We're not trying to pressure Syrians not to go back or anything, but we just recognize that right now Syria is still at war. There's still a problem there, and you can't just force people to go back. And basically, there's a disagreement over this. Are there areas in Syria that are safe enough for refugees to go back or not? This is the crux of the argument, right? And Bassil's also gotten pushback from within Lebanon as well, right? So I don't know if the Hariri's actually come out and said anything, but Aids to Hariri have come out and said, sorry, this is the Prime Minister's area. He shouldn't be treading on that. Darian, the Grand Mufti, he came out in his Eid sermon, and he didn't directly say anything against Bassil, right? But he indirectly he made some comments that seem very much pointed towards rebutting Bassil, right?
Very much so.
Yeah, he said something like, I don't understand how one person can make a decision on such a serious issue as if there is no government or national policy already in place. Yeah, what could he possibly be talking about? Well, obviously this. Yeah. Also, Bassil this week came out and said that there's a deeper conspiracy against Lebanon. He went out to Arsel and went to this cave where a bunch of soldiers had been held, a bunch of Lebanese soldiers and police had been held by ISIS. And he said that, thinking of the conspiracy that threatened our existence. You use terms like this, and I am thinking of those responsible in the international community who committed such a crime against Lebanon and Syria, which is really sort of over the top, it sounds like, and a ratcheting up of his rhetoric and a broadening of it against, not just UNHCR, but who else is he talking about in the international community? UNHCR's backers, we're not sure, and connecting that as well to the threat of Daesh in the country. But the bottom line, though, as you were saying to me before we went on the air, is he's the one always speaking up about this because
it's his politics, right? I mean, Bassil has announced himself as the anti-refugee settlement kind of politician in Lebanon. He always has this very escalated rhetoric in relation to Palestinian refugees or Syrian refugees. He even submitted this draft law, or he said he would submit it, that would allow Lebanese women to pass the citizenship to their family unless their husbands are either Palestinians or Syrians. So this anti-Tawtin, anti-naturalization of refugees rhetoric, he's kind of the poster boy for it right now in Lebanon. Don't you feel the same? I mean, it has this very right-wing kind of scapegoating politics happening.
Right. I mean, but he's not unique in that, right? This is something that you can see across the Christian spectrum. It doesn't matter if it's Bassil, somebody else from the FPM, or the LF, or the Kata'ib. It doesn't matter. They all have, maybe not to the same like heights, but they all have this sort of soaring rhetoric about like the dangers of this, right?
Yeah.
Which really reveals like the bottom line here, that they're like, this plays well amongst the Christian community because the Christian community is scared that these people are going to stay and they're going to irreversibly change the demography of Lebanon.
Yep.
Right? And obviously not in their favor.
And I think Basile is really...
Basile was really obsessed with this.
Yeah, so much so, actually. And I think it makes sense because he's had this rhetoric that is anti-Palestinian or anti-Syrian for a while. And imagine if Syrian refugees don't go home, that he will have such a huge social force in Lebanon that has a grudge on him, right? So I think politically, he's continuing what he's been doing for a few years now, being the provocative figure, the Donald Trump style politician in Lebanon, right?
Get you places, apparently. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about in this episode is obviously cabinet formation. What we live and breathe for here. But I think it would be interesting to take just a quick step back and talk about sort of like the broad strokes of how a cabinet is formed, and like what exactly are these negotiations, what are they negotiating, and what are they not negotiating. So I want to start out with what they are not negotiating. Mm-hmm. And that is, there are sectarian quotas in cabinet. These are not constitutional. They're not according to the Ta'if Accord. They're not in law, enshrined anywhere in law, but they are sort of, we know that if there is a 30-member cabinet, then a certain number, like, for instance, 3 ministers will be Druze, for sure. The only thing that's sort of like enshrined constitutionally is that it'll be 50-50 Muslim Christian, right? Beyond that, we don't have any of this, but we do know that, okay, a 30-member cabinet, 15 Christians, 15 Muslims. Within the Muslim side, we know that there will be 6 Sunnis, 6 Shiites, and 3 Druze.
Although Lebanon Basile spoke about a Alawite minister this time, right?
Yeah, well, they were talking about perhaps having 32 ministers, right? And so you would add an Alawite on the Muslim side and add one of the minority Christians, I forget if it was a Syrian or Syriac, something like that, on the Christian side. Yeah. And then, on the Christian side, I think typically the breakdown for a 30-member cabinet is something like 6 Maronites, 4 Greek Orthodox, 3 Catholics, and 2 Armenians, typically Armenian Orthodox, because they're the dominant Armenian sect. So this is, there can be changes in this. Occasionally you might see, I think like in the Makati cabinet, they had 1 extra Sunni at the expense of the Shiites, for instance. But by and large, these things are set. And if you're going to mess with these numbers, you need a very compelling reason, and you need everybody to get on board, basically. And you need whatever sect is giving up a seat to be happy about giving up that seat and okay with that. So this is what they are most likely not discussing, right? This is one of those things that that is set, that is very, very hard to change. And it's the same whether it's a 30-member cabinet or a 24-member cabinet. It's just like everything gets shrunk down a little bit, right? But these ratios are set by convention, by precedent. So what are they actually arguing over then? Well, they're arguing over against something that doesn't have nearly as much of a precedent, and that is like the party's stakes. And also the president's shares and the prime minister's share, right? So typically we have like a president's share in the cabinet. Say the president gets to name like 5 ministers or 3 ministers or whatever it may be, but this is not like set. There's no like the president always gets to name five people in a 30-member cabinet necessarily. So this is one of the things they're talking about. How big should the president's share be? What should that share look like? How big should the other party's shares be? These are all of the things I think right now. I mean, we don't know. I don't get on the phone with Saad Hariri at night and like
don't.
and gab about the latest the latest whatever discussions he's had with Michel Aoun. I don't know for sure, but I am like pretty sure like this is what everything is being zeroed in on, because it makes sense, right?
Yeah, I think what they're actually arguing about or negotiating about is who gets the predetermined number of seats for each sect. So, for example, Hezbollah is pushing for a Sunni seat that is against Hariri, thinking of Osama Saad in Saida, for example.
Right.
Basil, for example, was saying that he wanted Talal Irslan, the only Druze MP that is not affiliated to Jumblat's bloc, to be as defense minister or in the cabinet, because they create this mini parliamentary bloc for Irslan that has Irslan and then 3 or 2 MPs from FPM in Shuf and Ali.
Yeah, which is sort of ridiculous, right? So you can't say, oh, I've got a strong 29-member bloc. But 4 of them are also this other bloc. That doesn't really work, unless you want to give up, definitely give up one of your seats in cabinet to Talal Arslan, which I guess that's what he wants to do.
That's probably what they're trying to do. Jumblat, on the other hand, saying no, all 3 Druze ministries should be my choice because I had the largest number of Druze MPs in parliament.
Right, he got 7 out of the 8 seats, right?
Exactly.
So
this is how I think the negotiations are happening, and I think the numbers are not the only important thing. The numbers are so important for the voting, for like which decision the cabinet makes, but also the type of ministry and which services it provides is probably more important in some cases. And sometimes also it depends on, for example, people, a certain party wanting to get a foreign ministry because it's about Lebanon's representation abroad and because they all have like foreign connections, etc. So I think it's too many intersecting dimensions that it's really hard for us to predict, for example.
Absolutely. And we've spoken about this before on the podcast about, like how the 4 sovereign ministries, finance, foreign, defense and interior, how they're sort of like the crown jewels. But then you also have the second tier ministries, right, that are sort of the services oriented, things like education, what else do you have?
Health, energy, right?
Public works, transportation, things like this. And then you have like sort of the tiny ministries that are still good. And then the ministers without portfolio, we call them ministers of state. These are still very important. These are like still very prized positions because when you come down to it, the cabinet is sort of like a mini parliament, right? Yep. And so if you have a vote, if you're there, like you've got a seat at the table, literally, and everybody wants that seat at the table, even if it's a ministry or a minister without portfolio, a minister of state, they still want that seat at the table. Definitely. The question though is like, will they accept will Kataib accept it if they are offered a minister of state position? Who knows? Talal Arslan was offered the Minister of State position a few governments back, and he didn't accept it because he thought that his stature was higher than that. His position in Lebanese politics was higher than that. And so he said, no, I'm not going to take it. I think his cousin or somebody related to him ended up taking it. So he didn't like lose out on the position, but he didn't lower... he didn't deign to go into that.
It's a matter of prestige,
role.
I guess.
So this week, we also had Samir Jaja, the head of the Lebanese forces, come out. He gave an interview to DPA, the German press agency. And he said a couple of things that, to me, sound like they are in contradiction. One thing that he said was that we had an agreement with the FPM, the Ma'arab agreement, and that said that we should have an equal share, the same share as the FPM bloc in cabinet.
In return for voting for Michel Aoun as president. Obviously.
Exactly. And he just said, so this is what happened. And technically it did happen last time.
Yeah.
They each got a 4 member share in the last cabinet. It's just that Michel Aoun got a presidential share of 5 and he gave them all to the FPM. So the FPM like had a much larger block in cabinet than the LF did. So anyway, Jaja said this, like we want equality with the FPM bloc. But at the same time, he was arguing that he wanted the LF share to be proportional to what they had gotten in Parliament. So last time they had, in the last Parliament, they had 8 MPs and they got 4 members of cabinet.
Which was quite exaggerated.
Right, a lot, right? and he didn't, I don't think he came out and said this, but he basically, put that idea out there that, we doubled our size in parliament, so we should have the commensurate, size in the cabinet as well. He was on that side. He was arguing for basing the LF cabinet size on its block on how many people it had in parliament. But on the other side, he was saying, well, we should have the same number of cabinet ministers as the FPM does, even though the FPM has twice as many people in parliament. We should have the same size.
I don't know, actually, if he means by that to include or exclude Aoun's share, right, as the president. Because I don't think that Jaja would say something as ridiculous as Aoun and the FPM being the largest bloc in parliament and the president having the same share as one party with 15 MPs, right?
But before him, I'm not sure if he said, I don't think he said it, but people within the LF have come out and said that Aoun, when naming the people for the president's share, this time Aoun must give some of their seats to the LF.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's just, it's another share for the FPM. And if Aoun wants to be above politics as a real president of everybody, then he needs to not just give cabinet seats out to his buddies in the FPM.
Sounds like a decent thing to do, not to give it to the LF, but to choose independent people like Michel Sleiman used to do.
I did a quick and dirty breakdown of if we are following that logic of how many ministers you should get if you are just basing things on your size, the size of your couple in parliament. And so what I came out with was if we consider the FPM, first off, let's say it's a 30-member block, a 30-member government, which is it seems like things are going in that direction. A 30-member government, it's easier to make than a 24-member government because you can include more people, right? And if we do that, then the FPM, if we are considering it as a 29-member block, should get 6.8, so 7 ministers, right? Future, the second largest block, should get 4.7, so 5 ministers. Amal for the LF 3.5. Hezbollah 3, the Marada and Karami block 1.6, so maybe 2. Makati should get 1. The PSP should get 2, and Katab should get 0.7 or so. And then there's 11 other random members of parliament, so they would make another one. So you fill in whatever the 30th. You've got 29 ministers here. You fill in the 30th with somebody. So this is interesting, though, because, for instance, if you're just going off these numbers, that means the LF 4 would be actually okay. You want your real size, what you deserve. 4 is being generous, even now. So having 4 last time was as you said, very, very generous to the LF.
It makes sense if they give 4 to LF, 4 to FPM, and then 3 more to FPM from Aoun's share in terms of the numbers you're saying, say 7 for FPM and 4 for LF, right? So it makes sense if they have 4 and 4, and then Aoun appoints 3 from FPM.
Right.
Which he will do anyway, to be honest.
Right. Or if they decide that the FPM block really is only 25 members and that there is this Arslan block with 4 members, then the FPMers would get 6 instead of 7, and you can break that down correctly in the same way between the presidential share and the FPM share, and then Arslan would get his one seat. Right? Yeah. So interestingly with this, if we are just going off the numbers though, then that means the PSP or Jumblat, he's been saying I want all 3 of my I got so I dominated the scene, the Druze seats, right? So I should get all 3 of them. Well, in the larger scheme of things, no. You really only got enough representation in Parliament to deserve 2 out of the 3 seats. And Arslan, if you count his that 4-member block, he does deserve that other Druze seat. On the other hand, though, if you go down to 24 members, then there's only 2, right? Only two Druze seats in a 24-member cabinet. Yeah. And if you do that, then definitely, you redo these numbers for everybody, and the PSP, Jumblat's block, he gets both of those seats. Doesn't matter what Arslan got or did not get, or his allies got or did not get. All of the Druze representation would definitely go to Jumblat.
Yeah, and I think also another dimension that's interesting is if we go with your numbers, so 7 FPM, 5 Future, etc., 4 RLF, etc. If we go with these numbers, then you will have, the question will be, how many ministries will be in the anti-Syrian regime bloc, or not bloc, but anti-Syrian regime camp to a certain extent, in cabinet? Because we always have these discussions about the third of the cabinet that can distort major decisions, right? We call it a ثلث المعطل. So basically...
blocking third, yeah.
Yeah. So basically whether LF Future and PSP and Kataib will have more than 10 ministers to block decisions that would be in favor of the Syrian regime, for instance, or major foreign policy or defense decisions. So I think that's exactly the edge of it, right? Because if we give 5 to Future, 4 to LF, and 2 to PSP, we have 11, and then maybe 1 for Kataib. That's like exactly the number they need, more than 1/3. And if they have a 32 minister cabinet, we're talking about 11 or 12 maybe for the blocking third.
Yeah.
So very interesting to see what's going to happen, because to be very honest, I think that Hezbollah, FPM, Amal, and the pro-Syrian camp in general won a very big majority in parliament. It's clear that Hezbollah is very, very explicit about having more power than before in Lebanese politics, especially that. Also, Mohammed Raad this week said Hezbollah can now, with its allies, block a lot of decisions in parliament, a lot of laws from being passed that we couldn't earlier. So it's very clear that Hezbollah is claiming this victory to a certain extent, and I think more interesting than Hezbollah itself is just the Syrian regime tolerant camp being the overwhelming majority of the cabinet or the parliament itself.
And Hezbollah wants a better ministry. In the past, they've settled for like ministers of state, and for ministries like I think they currently have youth and sports, for instance, which is a tiny ministry, minuscule, and they're saying this time around we're not going to ask for that top tier yet. We're not going to ask for a sovereign ministry, but we are going to ask for one of those service ministries. And so I think health is being considered. And we're going to see all of this stuff happen over the next couple of weeks, because now we are in Eid al-Fitr right now. And everybody has been saying, once Eid al-Fitr, once Ramadan is done, once Eid is done, then we are going to actually get down to the business of forming a cabinet. And so there's a lot of expectations that there's going to be, like, things are going to actually shift into high gear over the next couple of weeks. And it seems as though all the parties really want this to happen pretty soon.
Yeah.
Whether that will actually happen or not, we don't know, but we're going to keep looking at it. And so we will be back next week with a whole new podcast looking at all this stuff. By the way, I think we should say we're very sorry we missed last week. It was sort of a last minute deal, a little case of double booking, because somebody got a little bit happy about their birthday. Yeah.
Did you really have to mention it?
Of course. Happy birthday, man.
Thank you. So we will be back next week with more on cabinet formation, most probably. Hopefully with a new cabinet, and more news that will drop this week. Follow us on SoundCloud, on Twitter, on iTunes. Let us know what you think of our podcast. We are very interested to hear your feedback. And see you next week.
I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.